There are stories buried so deep beneath American soil that even the wind refuses to speak their names. This one began in the parish of St. Augustine, Louisiana, in the summer of 1874. The cotton fields had turned red that season, not from the clay, but from something thicker that refused to wash away. They say the giant slave woman, known only as Mara, had not spoken a word in 20 years. Her silence was legend, an oath, some said, or a curse. But one night, as thunder cracked across the cane fields, she whispered something to the overseer's wife. The woman collapsed screaming, clawing her own face. By dawn, her body was found in the well, her mouth packed with mud and her ears gone. The sheriff wrote it off as madness. The preacher called it temptation of the devil. But the old folks who'd seen Mara working in the field swore they heard her say only one thing. He took them from me, all 9. That whisper, carried by the wind, marked the beginning of what locals would later call the harvest of daughters. The plantation was known as Black Hollow, a 1,000-acre estate wrapped in fog and superstition. It was built in 1821 by Ezekiel Harrow, a man whose fortune rose with the number of graves on his land. When the war ended, Harrow was never tried for the disappearances of his workers, nor for the 9 girls who vanished in 1859, each one a daughter of the giant woman. People said Mara bore them in secret, that they were taken at birth, for the good of the house. Locals spoke of cries heard from beneath the nursery, of damp air that smelled of milk and rust. But by the time Union soldiers arrived, the house stood silent. Only Mara remained, her body towering, her eyes milk-white, her mind shattered into ritual silence. Harrow's lineage vanished mysteriously within a decade. But the house endured, and so did the whisper, passed down by field hands, then by their children, until it became a warning. Never walk the fields at night. The daughters still breathe beneath. When restoration crews entered Black Hollow in 1902, they found something behind the nursery wall, 9 hollow impressions, shaped like children pressed into plaster. In 1928, a state archivist named Thomas Redden uncovered an unmarked ledger in the basement of the Louisiana orphanage for colored children. The handwriting was inconsistent, sometimes steady, sometimes trembling, but always signed the same, E.H. The entries listed names, birth years, and one chilling column labeled reclamation. Each name corresponded to a girl born on the Harrow plantation between 1840 and 1859. The final note read, "All accounted for, save the 9th. Subject unrecovered. The mother refuses confession." Redden tried to trace the origin of the ledger. 3 days later, he was found dead in his boarding room, his mouth stuffed with cotton, his eyes wide, his fingers ink-black. The ledger vanished from evidence. A colleague who'd handled the book said it left a film on her hands, like sap, or blood that hadn't dried. She swore she heard a voice when she touched the pages, something low and feminine, humming through the grain of the paper. The orphanage burned to the ground that winter. Its cause was never determined. But in the ashes, a melted plaque was found, bearing the initials MH. Every legend hides one piece that doesn't fit. For Black Hollow, that piece was the 9th daughter, the one who escaped the wall. Some say she was born malformed, her body half-grown, and her voice too deep to be human. Others said she was spirited away by Union soldiers, seen decades later working as a laundress in New Orleans. But in 1937, a WPA folklorist named Evelyn Cross interviewed aging locals about the plantation. One blind woman told her, "The 9th never left. She went back inside her mama." Evelyn dismissed it as superstition until she visited the ruins of Black Hollow. Beneath the roots of a magnolia, she found a set of bones far too large for a woman, fused together with smaller ones, like ribs growing inside ribs. Her journal entry that night ended abruptly after the line, "She was building herself again." Evelyn Cross was institutionalized 2 weeks later, her tongue reportedly blackened, her pulse erratic. In her final note, she wrote a single phrase. "She whispered to me what he did." By 1943, the story had become taboo, a local ghost tale whispered by midwives and gravediggers. Yet in a rural church not far from St. Augustine, the pastor began preaching about sins buried in the earth. He said the land beneath their feet was not soil, but skin, that the cries of the enslaved had turned into roots, that the daughters of Black Hollow had not died, but waited. His sermons grew erratic, feverish, until one Sunday he began screaming scripture backward, his eyes rolled white. Witnesses claimed a woman stood in the back pew, too tall to be human, her veil soaked dark at the hem. When the congregation fled, they said they heard her whisper, "Follow them into the fields." 9 times I birthed. 1 time I rose. The church was later condemned, its pulpit split down the center. As if struck from beneath, in 1947, a road crew widening Route 19 near St. Augustine uncovered a cluster of graves without markers. The bones were discolored, as though soaked in something that had seeped through the soil for years. 9 small graves, and 1 larger. A coroner's report noted that the large skeleton's ribs had fused with fragments from the smaller ones, like branches grown into a trunk. The report was sealed by state order within a week. Locals said they'd warned the workers not to dig near that bend of the road, that it wasn't ground at all, it was the mother's back. When one of the crewmen, Henry Vass, returned home that night, his wife claimed he kept mumbling in his sleep, words that didn't sound like English. By morning, he was gone, clothes folded by the bed, boots left outside. A week later, a neighbor saw something massive standing by the ditch where the bones were found. It wasn't moving. It was listening. They filled the graves back in. The state paved over the site within days. To this day, the asphalt buckles every spring. As if something underneath is still breathing, the story might have died there if not for the recordings. In 1951, field ethnographer Dr. Althea Green collected work songs from aging sharecroppers around St. Augustine. Among them was one recording, cataloged only as Track 19. It began with a woman humming, low and broken, as if her throat were too dry to carry melody. Then other voices joined, 9 in total, by Green's count, all repeating the same fragmented line. He took them from the wall and gave them to the field. When Green played it back at the university, her colleagues noticed something strange. Beneath the voices was another sound, deep, rhythmic, like a second heart beating under the earth. She slowed the playback speed. At 1/4 speed, the hum resolved into something resembling speech. A woman's voice, ancient, heavy, whispering one word. Rebirth. 2 weeks later, Green disappeared. Her reel recorder was found still running in her hotel room, tape spooling endlessly. On the final seconds of the tape, a low voice murmurs, "The daughters have learned to sing." By 1955, St. Augustine had become a town that refused to look backward. The church had been rebuilt. The road had been paved. But something was wrong with the children born that year. The midwives whispered about it first. Babies too large, bones soft like wax, skin with faint ridges down the spine. Some were born still. Others grew quickly, then stopped speaking altogether. Doctors blamed nutrition, water contamination, anything but the obvious. But mothers began to dream the same dream. A woman of impossible height, standing over the river, her hands full of light, whispering, "Bring them home." When one of the afflicted children turned 9, she vanished during a church fair. They found her footprints leading toward the marsh, and beside them, another set. Enormous. Bare. The girl's name was Hattie Cross, great-grandniece of the WPA folklorist who'd uncovered the bones decades earlier. Her mother said she heard singing that night, faint through the cypress trees, a song she recognized from an old phonograph labeled Track 19. In 1962, a group of historical preservationists acquired the remains of Black Hollow Plantation, hoping to turn it into a museum. The restoration lasted 6 days. The foreman, Walter Dean, kept a journal. His entries began routine, schedules, weather, expenses. Then they shifted. Day 3, we found the nursery. Walls breathing in the heat. Day 4, there are voices in the hall. 9, I think. Day 5, the mother's portrait is changing. Eyes are open now. On the morning of day 6, the entire crew abandoned the site. Dean's body was found inside the nursery, beneath a collapsed beam. His chest was crushed inward, as if by a massive hand. When the sheriff's men examined the site, they noted that the walls were warm to the touch, even though the house had no power. No photographs survived. All negatives were found to be fogged, as though exposed to light from inside the camera. The estate was condemned again, sealed with iron gates and concrete. But concrete, like silence, cracks with time. By the early 1970s, St. Augustine had become a place people avoided after dark. Farmers said their fields hummed beneath the soil. Fishermen refused to go near the river when the fog rose, said they'd seen a woman walking through it, her dress dragging like a net. A traveling preacher claimed he'd met her in a dream. She doesn't speak with a tongue, he said, but with memory. He warned that what was buried in Black Hollow was not a ghost, but something closer to the earth, something that remembers pain like language. He died mid-sermon that night, choking on soil. In the months that followed, 9 newborns across 3 counties were found missing. No ransom, no witnesses. Just open windows and muddy footprints too large for any human mother. Locals began leaving offerings at the roadside: salt, milk, cotton wrapped in cloth. A desperate peace offering. But those who listened carefully said they could still hear her in the distance. The giant slave woman who never spoke. Until she whispered again. And this time, she was not whispering names. She was counting. In 1974, newly declassified military documents revealed the existence of a short-lived post-war department called the Bureau of Reclamation. Its stated purpose: recovery of lost Southern assets and human property following Reconstruction. Most files were redacted, but one memo referenced Experiment H9, maternal containment, St. Augustine sector. No personnel listed. No dates. Only a seal burned into the paper. A magnolia root twisted into the shape of a woman's face. Researchers traced the memo's origin to a storage site in Baton Rouge. When they arrived, the facility was gone, collapsed into the swamp as if the ground itself had inhaled. Residents nearby reported lights under the water that night, like lanterns sinking slowly. One man swore he saw a hand the size of a cartwheel reaching upward before it vanished again. The Bureau never appeared in public records afterward. But across Louisiana, federal surveyors began quietly buying parcels of land known to hold disused plantations. Every deed bore the same clause at the bottom: do not disturb substructure. Active reclamation ongoing. In 1982, a retired clerk named Mary Ellison contacted a journalist claiming to have worked for the Bureau during its final months. Her letter was rambling, written in shaking script, but one passage stood out. They said it was about preservation, but we weren't preserving. We were feeding it. Each year, they sent 9, always 9, to the sites. They called it recompense. Ellison never explained who they were. The journalist, Daniel Cole, drove to meet her at her home outside Lafayette. He found the house empty, the front door open. On the table lay a stack of photos, children standing in front of plantation ruins, all with faces smudged out. On the back of one photo, they sang for her, so she would stay asleep. Cole mailed the evidence to his editor, but never returned to work. The box arrived 2 weeks later, waterlogged, faintly warm to the touch. The negatives were blank, except one, showing a single enormous footprint in the mud, with 9 smaller ones inside it. The parish church that once condemned Mara was rebuilt again in 1985. Its new pastor, Father Jonah Reeves, prided himself on reclaiming the sacred ground. 3 months after opening, his congregation began reporting strange hums beneath the floorboards during Mass. Low, rhythmic, like a choir without mouths. Reeves dismissed it as plumbing until, one Sunday, the organ began to play by itself. Witnesses said it wasn't music, it was breathing. Each note stretched too long, too heavy, until the sound pressed against their ribs. The following week, Reeves held a midnight service to banish the superstition. The candles melted in minutes. The air thickened with humidity, though it was midwinter. He was last seen kneeling at the altar, whispering something over and over. 9 for 1, 1 for 9. When parishioners returned at dawn, the church was silent again. The floorboards bulged upward, as though something beneath had shifted in its sleep. They closed the church permanently, sealing the doors with iron. But travelers at night still report hearing a woman's voice echoing through the walls, not in rage, but in mourning. In the spring of 1991, St. Augustine was struck by the worst flood in its recorded history. The levees broke first, then the fields. The water came not like rain, but like something exhaled from the earth itself. Bodies surfaced from the mud, not fresh, not skeletal, but preserved, like wax. Most were female. All were headless. The governor declared a state of emergency, and federal agents arrived within hours. But no media coverage followed. Local papers were ordered silent. Residents said trucks came at night, hauling the bodies away under canvas. By dawn, the water receded. What it left behind were 9 new sinkholes arranged in a perfect circle around the ruins of Black Hollow. From that day forward, no crops would grow within that circle. The ground was rich, dark, and wet, but everything planted there withered. Farmers called it the mother's breath. Scientists called it an anomaly in soil composition. But those who lived nearby said that if you pressed your ear to the ground, you could still hear her heartbeat, slow and patient, waiting for her children to come home. By 1999, the story of the giant slave woman had nearly vanished from public record. Textbooks erased her. Maps omitted St. Augustine. But silence is not the same as peace. A federal law known as the Historical Containment Act quietly restricted access to unstable heritage sites across the South, including the ruins of Black Hollow. When one historian, Dr. Lionel Griggs, petitioned to study the site, he received a letter from the Department of Cultural Security. It read, "St. Augustine Parish does not exist." Days later, Griggs's colleagues received an anonymous package, a tape recorder, and a note. The tape contained 7 minutes of faint static, followed by a woman's whisper. "You built silence over sin, but silence is porous." The voice was not human pitch. It resonated like something enormous speaking through soil. The note was signed simply, "The 9th," and beneath that, a line written in red pencil, "She's awake." In 2001, an anthropology graduate student named June Salter uncovered a rusted film canister mislabeled Weather Survey, St. Augustine. Inside was 8 minutes of black and white footage, uncut and silent. The reel began with a man's hand placing a microphone into the soil. Wind howled. The tape hissed. Then, faintly, the ground trembled. Through the distortion came a voice, not spoken but exhaled. "You have forgotten the names." Frames flickered. The image blurred. For a heartbeat, the outline of a woman's face appeared, vast, half-formed from the dirt itself. Her eyes were closed, her expression almost serene. Then, 9 shadows rose behind her, smaller, drifting like figures made of smoke. The reel ended abruptly. The last frame burned white, as though the camera had caught sunlight underground. June Salter sent the footage to the state archives. It never arrived. Her advisor later found her notebook, open to one line written over and over. She was never buried. We were. In the years that followed, travelers spoke of strange mirages on Route 19. Some saw a plantation where there was none, others, a church glowing faintly at dusk. Satellite images of the area revealed shifting topography, mounds forming overnight, vanishing by dawn. Scientists called it subsidence. Locals called it breathing. When drones flew over the site in 2007, their footage captured concentric rings in the crops, 9 circles around one immense center. The pattern matched an engraving found in the ruins of Black Hollow, the mother's seal. Those who dared to walk the field said the air changed, heavier, like standing beneath a storm that never breaks. Some heard humming. Others claimed to see faces in the soil, not terrifying, but mournful. One traveler left a note pinned to a roadside cross. "The ground forgives nothing, but it remembers everything." No one took the note down. The wind did it for them. In 2012, a private foundation announced plans for a museum dedicated to the forgotten histories of the South. The site chosen was, once again, Black Hollow. Construction began under floodlights. Workers reported equipment jamming, compasses spinning, and foundations that sank overnight. They joked that the land didn't want a museum, it wanted silence. 3 months later, the project was abandoned. Funding evaporated. The foundation's archives were sealed. Years later, a contractor revealed they'd uncovered an underground chamber before the shutdown, walls engraved with handprints of different sizes. 9 small, 1 immense. In the center lay a pool of still water that reflected nothing above it, only faces beneath. He said he ran before they touched the surface, but sometimes, in dreams, he hears the water calling names that don't exist on any record. The museum never opened. The sign out front still reads, "Coming soon." In 2019, storms swept across Louisiana, tearing open sections of old highway. Beneath the cracked asphalt near St. Augustine, road crews found bone, cloth, and fragments of rusted chain. As they worked, microphones from a nearby news van picked up an interference pattern, a hum that formed words only when slowed down. Spectrogram analysis revealed a phrase hidden within the noise. The mothers will rise through memory. That night, towns along the river reported lights moving beneath the water, like candles drifting upstream. A child watching from her porch said she heard singing, not frightening, just unbearably sad. She asked her grandmother what it was. The old woman only wept and whispered, "That's not thunder. That's them remembering." By dawn, the lights were gone. But across 9 parishes, levee soil turned black, rich, fertile, and strangely warm to the touch. Now, no map marks St. Augustine. No document admits the name Marajero. Yet, when the wind crosses those forgotten fields, it carries the same rhythm as a heartbeat. Historians call it folklore. The faithful call it penance. But those who have stood there, alone, at dusk, know better. They say the silence feels alive, as if the earth itself is breathing through you. They say if you listen long enough, you can hear her whisper once more, "I do not haunt you. I am what you built me from." And somewhere beneath your feet, 9 echoes answer, soft, endless, rising like a hymn through the soil. The giant slave woman never spoke again, because she no longer needed to. The land speaks for her now.